Right now, if you want a sale, uh, just a single commercial oil tanker out of the Persian Gulf, it is going to cost you $7.5 million.
Wow. Wow.
And,
Yeah.
you know, that's not for the ship. That's not for the cargo. That is literally just the cost of the war risk insurance policy for a single one-way trip.
Right.
It's just a massive overnight 12-fold spike. So welcome to what happens when the global geopolitical board doesn't just get rearranged. It basically gets violently flipped over.
It really is a staggering financial metric. I mean, it tells you pretty much everything you need to know about the sheer velocity of the events unfolding in the Middle East right now.
Yeah.
The markets are terrified, honestly, because the traditional rules and engagement have just completely evaporated.
Which is exactly why we're here today. So welcome to another deep dive. If you've been watching the news this week leading up to today, March 14th, 2026, you know the world feels like it's kind of spinning off its axis.
Yeah.
Our mission for this deep dive is to connect the dots of the last week of geopolitics for you. We're focusing specifically on the rapidly escalating direct military conflict between the United States, Israel, and Iran.
Right.
And because nothing happens in a vacuum, we're also going to look at how global players like Russia and China fit into this massive puzzle.
Yeah, and to do this, we are pulling from a pretty heavy stack of raw materials. We've got official U.S. Department of War and Pentagon transcripts, White House press releases, maritime security reports, and some really hard financial market data.
Definitely. And just a quick note on how we're approaching this today. When you read the raw transcripts from the White House, right alongside statements from Iranian state media and their military leadership, the rhetoric is, well, it's blindingly hot.
Oh, absolutely.
You're looking at highly charged political statements from U.S. leadership, including President Trump, clashing directly with Iranian ideological declarations. So our job today is to just strip away all of that political heat.
Exactly. We are not taking any sides here.
Right. We're not endorsing either government's narrative. We're simply here to look at the cold, hard strategies on the ground so you can actually understand what's happening.
Yeah, so let's start with the physical reality of the battlefield right now. We're currently in the middle of what the U.S. has designated Operation Epic Fury.
Okay, let's unpack this. Epic Fury.
Right. This officially began on February 28th, 2026.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to be really clear about what this is. This is not some localized proxy skirmish.
No.
This is an active, sustained kinetic campaign by the U.S. and Israel striking directly inside sovereign Iranian territory.
And the stated objectives from Washington are incredibly broad, which is part of why this feels so unprecedented. Like,
Yeah.
they aren't just trying to send a diplomatic message with a few cruise missiles.
Right.
The U.S. military's stated goals are to completely destroy Iran's offensive ballistic missile production capacity, to utterly annihilate their naval capabilities, and to permanently prevent Tehran from developing a nuclear weapon.
It's massive.
Just looking at the Department of War briefing from day 10 of the operation, I mean, the scale is wild. We're talking about over 50,000 U.S. troops involved in the theater, with over 5,000 specific targets already struck.
Yeah, and the military impact of those strikes is highly visible right now. The Pentagon is tracking a 90% decrease in Iranian ballistic missile attacks.
Bro, 90%.
Yeah, and an 83% drop in drone attacks since the operation began. Plus, they're reporting the sinking of over 50 Iranian naval ships.
That's a lot of ships.
It's a phenomenal, just overwhelming application of conventional military power. The U.S. and Israel are systematically degrading Iran's physical ability to fight a traditional war.
But Tehran has to know they can't win a conventional shootout with the United States, right?
Right.
So how do they fight back when their traditional military infrastructure is just being dismantled like this?
Well, but they don't fight a conventional shootout. They rely on a strategy military planners call cost imposition and asymmetric escalation. Iran knows it's completely outmatched in a direct fight. So their goal is to stretch the battlefield across the entire region. They're actively threatening the neighboring Gulf states that host U.S. military operations.
Ah, I see.
Yeah, aiming to raise the economic and political costs of the war so high that Washington is eventually forced by the international community to just seek an off-ramp.
So if I'm understanding this right, it's like a heavyweight boxer facing off against a swarm of bees. Like, the U.S. has the overwhelming conventional power, but Iran is trying to make the fight so wide and chaotic that the U.S. gets stung from every direction.
That's exactly it. That perfectly sets up how Iran plans to deliver those stings.
Yeah.
You don't target the military directly, you target the vulnerability of the global system that the military is trying to protect.
Right.
And to understand how Iran applies that pressure, you have to look beyond the Middle East and look directly at the world's most vulnerable economic superpower.
Which brings us to China. Because you really can't talk about a conflict in the Middle East without asking where Russia and China are in all this.
No, you can't.
Iran's strategy of cost imposition only works if they can inflict pain on someone who has the leverage to force a change in the situation.
Right. And China is in a highly unique, incredibly vulnerable position here. They are the world's biggest oil importer,
Yeah.
and they rely heavily on Iranian crude to keep their massive industrial base functioning.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. You can actually see the panic setting in Beijing right now.
Yeah.
In March, they imposed an immediate sweeping ban on all refined fuel exports.
Right. Just totally locked it down.
Yeah, and they aren't doing that as a political statement. They're doing it out of pure domestic desperation to hoard their own energy supplies because they see the writing on the wall.
Exactly. Meanwhile, Russia is playing this very calculated game of diplomatic shielding. Neither Russia nor China are stepping in to fight on Iran's behalf militarily,
Sure.
but they are providing crucial cover. At the United Nations, they've actively blocked discussions within the Iran Sanctions Committee, just tying up the diplomatic process.
Wow.
Furthermore, Russia is quietly continuing its nuclear sector engagement with Iran through its state energy corporation, Rosatom, all while publicly condemning the U.S. and Israeli strikes as illegal.
But why would Russia do that? Is it just to poke the United States in the eye, or is there more to it?
Oh, it's definitely deeper than that. Geopolitics is a zero-sum game for resources and attention. A United States that is heavily bogged down, spending billions of dollars and committing massive naval assets to a conflict in the Middle East, well, that is a United States fundamentally distracted from what Russia is doing in Eastern Europe.
Right, or what China might want to do in the Indo-Pacific.
Exactly. It serves both of their grand strategies to keep the U.S. entangled, provided the global economy doesn't totally collapse in the process.
But that global economic collapse is exactly what Iran is threatening right now. If we connect this to the bigger picture, China's panic over their domestic oil supply leads us directly to the geographical center of this entire crisis, the Strait of Hormuz.
The ultimate choke point. If you look at a map, the Strait of Hormuz is this narrow stretch of water sitting right between Iran and Oman.
Yeah.
And at its narrowest, the actual shipping lanes that deep-water vessels can use are only 2 miles wide in either direction.
2 miles, that is nothing.
It's the jugular vein of the global economy. Normally, about 20% of the world's seaborne energy, crude oil, and liquefied natural gas has to squeeze through this one tiny corridor.
And Iran has effectively declared that corridor closed. The economic shockwave has been instantaneous. Like we mentioned at the start, insurance premiums jumped to 3.2% of a ship's total value, costing $7.5 million just to insure a very large crude carrier.
Right.
But the commodity itself is skyrocketing, too. Brent crude oil spiked past $126 a barrel.
Yeah, and to try and counter that massive shock to the system, the U.S. and the International Energy Agency, the IEA, announced the largest release of emergency oil stockpiles in history.
Right, I read that.
They authorized the release of 182 million barrels.
Wait, I have to push back on that strategy, though, because the math simply doesn't add up.
How so?
Well, the sources say releasing 182 million barrels over a typical 120-day period equals about 1.4 million barrels of oil a day.
Right.
But if the Strait of Hormuz is functionally closed, the global market is losing roughly 21 million barrels a day. That 1.4 million barely covers 15% of the lost supply. Isn't that just a Band-Aid on a gaping wound? Why even bother?
That's a great point. But you have to remember that strategic petroleum releases are rarely about replacing every single physical barrel of oil. They're largely psychological weapons.
Oh, really?
Yeah. The global commodities market is heavily driven by algorithmic trading. When algorithms see a choke point close, they automatically initiate panic buying, which causes a runaway spike in prices.
Ah, okay. That makes sense.
Right. By dumping 182 million barrels onto the market in one massive headline, the U.S. is trying to break that algorithmic panic and signal to the markets that there is a buffer. It basically buys the military time to go fix the actual root cause of the problem in the water.
And the military did exactly that. Because Iran wasn't just, verbally threatening to close the strait. They were actively trying to seed those 2-mile-wide shipping lanes with sophisticated naval mines.
Exactly.
On the night of March 11th, the U.S. Navy conducted a massive targeted intervention, hunting down and eliminating 16 Iranian mine-laying vessels overnight.
They had to. I mean, if even a handful of those mines make it into the shipping corridor, Commercial captains will just refuse to sail, regardless of what the U.S. government says about safety.
And the U.S. didn't stop at the mine layers either. They escalated the economic threat by striking military targets on Karg Island.
Right.
For those who don't know, Karg Island is the terminal responsible for a staggering 90% of Iran's global oil shipments.
Wow.
The U.S. deliberately spared the actual oil infrastructure itself. They focused on annihilating the air defenses and naval bases surrounding the terminal. But President Trump issued a very clear public ultimatum threatening to completely obliterate Iran's oil infrastructure if the shipping lanes remain blocked.
And Iran fired right back, threatening to attack facilities owned by U.S.-linked oil companies operating anywhere in the region.
So what does this all mean? How does Iran project power and actually follow through on these threats when their conventional navy is being systematically destroyed?
Well, their mine layers are sitting at the bottom of the Gulf. Their air defenses around their most vital economic assets are gone. So who is actually capable of doing the stinging for Iran right now?
Right.
Who's left? The proxy network, the axis of resistance. Iran has spent decades building, funding, and training an intricate web of militant groups across the Middle East, specifically for a moment like this.
Right.
Right now, the most active fighters are Hezbollah up in Lebanon, who have officially entered this phase of the war by coordinating massive missile barrages with Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC.
Okay.
You also have heavily armed Iraqi militias aligned with Iran, who are maintaining a constant operational tempo, launching one-way attack drones and rockets at U.S. diplomatic facilities and military bases in Iraq and Syria.
But there is one detail in the geopolitical analyses that really caught my attention. Yemen's Houthi movement.
Yes.
Geographically, they sit right on the Red Sea, completely controlling access to the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. They are arguably Iran's most disruptive, heavily armed ally. But right now, they are sitting this out.
They are.
They've rolled out their missile launchers. They've stated publicly that their fingers are on the trigger, but they haven't actually entered the fight yet. If Iran's whole strategy is to create widespread chaos, why hold back your most disruptive proxy?
It comes down to a very cold, calculated preservation strategy by the IRGC. The Houthis are being held as the ultimate insurance policy.
Interesting.
Yeah. If we look back to 2025, during the U.S. military's Operation Rough Rider, the Houthis took an absolute beating from sustained U.S. and Israeli airstrikes.
Right, I remember that.
But crucially, they survived.
Yeah.
They absorbed the damage, hid their most vital assets, and did not have their top-tier leadership completely decapitated the way Hezbollah has in the past.
So Iran is basically saving them for the final escalation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The IRGC has spent years cultivating a massive, highly complex weapons smuggling and production network for the Houthis, threading through the Horn of Africa and directly into Yemen. Tehran does not want to expose that network to another round of heavy U.S. bombing prematurely.
That makes a lot of sense.
Right. Yeah. If the Iranian regime reaches a point where it feels its very survival is truly threatened, if the U.S. moves from degrading military assets to targeting the regime itself, that is when they will unleash the Houthis.
Wow.
An intact Houthi force can deploy their arsenal to completely choke off the Red Sea. If you close the Strait of Hormuz and the Red Sea simultaneously, global maritime trade effectively stops. It is Iran's strategic reserve.
You mentioning the 2025 Operation Rough Rider really highlights how many military frameworks are overlapping here. We keep seeing operational names in the military transcripts: Rough Rider, Spartan Shield, Midnight Hammer, Epic Fury. And it can be incredibly confusing to track what is actually happening right now versus what is just a standing mission.
Yeah, it's vital to clarify the terminology here to understand the U.S. military posture. You will hear Operation Spartan Shield mentioned frequently in the press briefings, but that is not the current offensive.
Okay.
Spartan Shield is the standing U.S. Army central mission. Think of it as the baseline foundation. It provides the theater framework, the daily logistics, and the force protection that is always operating quietly across Southwest Asia to support everything else.
Got it.
Operation Epic Fury, on the other hand, is the massive active kinetic combat operation happening right now to dismantle the Iranian military.
And to really understand the mechanics of Epic Fury, you have to look at the historical parallel of Operation Midnight Hammer from June of 2025.
Okay.
Midnight Hammer was that historic U.S. strike specifically targeting Iranian nuclear facilities. The Pentagon detailed that operation, and the hardware involved was terrifying.
Absolutely.
They utilized 7 B-2 Spirit stealth bombers, dropping 14 massive ordnance penetrators. These are known as GBU-57s. They are 30,000-pound bombs made of solid steel, designed not to explode on impact, but to drill deep into solid mountain granite before detonating, specifically to destroy deeply buried nuclear sites like Fordo and Natanz.
And that is a perfect example of how military strategy dictates the tools used. Midnight Hammer was a highly classified, incredibly narrow surgical raid. Its sole focus was penetrating deeply buried nuclear infrastructure.
Right.
Epic Fury is a completely different mechanism of war. It is a sustained daily steamroller of a campaign designed for total degradation. We're seeing over 125 U.S. aircraft conducting daily sorties, massive volleys of Tomahawk cruise missiles launched from submarines, and a really fascinating shift in tactics.
You're talking about Task Force Scorpion Strike, right?
Yes, Epic Fury marks the first major combat use of low-cost, one-way attack drones by the U.S. military under this new unit, Task Force Scorpion Strike.
Oh.
Instead of risking a $100 million stealth bomber right away, the U.S. is deploying swarms of these cheap drones. The mechanism here is to force the Iranian military to activate their radar and fire their highly expensive, limited supply of interceptor missiles at cheap drones.
Oh, that's smart.
Exactly. Once the Iranian air defense batteries are exhausted and out of ammo, the U.S. follows up with the heavy bombers and Tomahawks to destroy the launchers themselves. It is a methodical dismantling of an entire military apparatus.
So after unpacking all the military tactics, the proxy networks, and the economic panic, this brings us to the most important question for you, the listener. Why does all of this matter to your daily life?
Right.
Aside from the massive geopolitical implications, this directly hits your wallet. For decades, the global economy has enjoyed what analysts call the Middle East discount on energy, assuming that oil would always flow relatively safely.
Yeah.
Well, that era is completely over. It has been violently replaced by a permanent security premium.
And that premium is unavoidable. Every time you fill up your car, every time you buy a consumer product that has to be shipped across the ocean, the cost of that extreme war risk insurance, the disrupted shipping lanes, and the massive logistical delays, all of that is going to be baked into the price.
Yeah.
This conflict guarantees that global inflation and the elevated cost of everyday goods are basically locked in for the foreseeable future.
And securing those shipping lanes brings up a fascinating and frankly concerning final thought. To get that oil moving again and secure the Strait of Hormuz, the U.S. Navy is considering establishing a formal, permanent escort program for commercial ships.
Right.
They are tentatively calling it Operation Sentinel Guard. This would literally mean U.S. destroyers sailing alongside commercial oil tankers to physically protect them from whatever Iran or its proxies throw at them.
But military resources, even for the United States, are finite.
Yeah.
You only have so many destroyers and frigates. If the United States commits a significant portion of its naval surface fleet to permanently guarding oil tankers in the Middle East, they have to pull those ships from somewhere else.
Ah, I see where this is going.
This raises an important question. Does that leave a massive strategic blind spot in the South China Sea? Because if you look at the global board, a massive U.S. naval blind spot in the Indo-Pacific is exactly what China, who, remember, is currently shielding Iran diplomatically, might want to exist.
The mechanics of how this all connects are truly staggering. The pieces on the global chessboard are definitely in motion, but the board itself has been upended, and we are all going to feel the impact of where these pieces finally land. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep your eyes open, and we'll see you next time.